Morning, everybody. 17th of August. Topic today is debarment or restriction of Bain and Company. And we've got a couple of guests that will be joining us, and we'll introduce them to you shortly. But let me give a little bit of context to why this discussion. On the 3rd of August, there was a very interesting announcement out of the UK that basically banned Bain and Company, one of the largest consulting companies in the world, based in the US, banned them from receiving UK government contracts for 3 years because of the state capture work in South Africa. So here is a country that banned a US organization for the work that it did in South Africa. And extracting from the Daily Maverick article, Bain Co is guilty of grave professional misconduct, which renders its integrity questionable. And that really is the focus of the discussion. The UK has now banned them, but what about South Africa? They have not been restricted or debarred in any way. And the question is why, what needs to be done? Should they be restricted? What would the processes be in order to get that done? Just getting a message here from Tebelo that the sound is very soft. I just wanted to quickly ask if anyone else is experiencing that. I did do a sound check earlier and it looked like it was okay, but just give me a shout if the sound is not coming through very well. I've got some.
It's really soft. It is a bit soft, Sean.
Thank you, Veronica. Let me just try another option then.
All right, is this any better?
Perfect.
Thank you. Let's go with that one. I'm just going to put this aside. All right. So that's the topic is just around the restriction of a business, and in this particular case, we're focused on a company called Bain and Company, and we're going to have a couple of guests, and I know that he will join us shortly. The first person that we're going to have up is Athol Williams. He was previously a partner at Bain and Company and blew the whistle on them in October 2019. He joined Bain, I think, 5 times in his career in different places. First, joined them in the US in Boston, I think in the UK as well, and then a couple of times joined them here in South Africa. And one of the last roles that he had was to oversee an investigation and then try and help fix Bain because of the work that they were involved in, particularly at SARS. That didn't work out very well, and in October 2019, he decided that he would blow the whistle on what was really going on in Bain. And he did that in many places. He is currently an ethics scholar. He has authored many books. I think I saw something like 7 or 9 books. And is co-author of the Institute of Social and Corporate Ethics. He is currently lecturing in social and corporate ethics at Oxford, which is why he got the time zone wrong. And then we'll also have Professor Sope Williams. Now, Prof Williams is known to many of us because she is certainly someone who is very respected in the public procurement space, internationally as well as South Africa. When I approached Prof Kino and said, who should we ask to talk about debarment, he said Prof Williams is the expert, and she is a specialist in that area. She has also authored many books. A couple of you might not know that she has been on the World Bank's International Advisory Group on Procurement. has also served on the Transparency International's working group on debarment and exclusion. So she really does understand this particular space. And then if all goes well, we might be able to get Johan van Lochenberg, who worked at SARS for many years, is an author, a tax practitioner, lifestyle audit advisor, and alternate dispute resolution. And just in time, Athol's joined us. Welcome, Athol. I'm just going to quickly make you co-host and then spotlight you as well. And thank you. Yes, thought that you may have got the time zones wrong, Athol.
Yeah, it's a schoolboy error. Sorry, Sean. I had it in UK time and got it wrong. Sorry.
And there we are. And Prof Williams has just joined us as well. So I'm gonna add Prof to this. And welcome, Prof. And I really have just for your benefit, Athol, I did introduce the topic, basically talking about the UK banning Bain for 3 years, and the question is, what about South Africa?
Right.
And so we're going to go through that discussion. What I proposed is a couple of discussion points just to try and help focus the discussion. The first one is just briefly ask Athol just to go through a little bit about your background. And Athol, I know you've got something like 5 masters and a PhD, and you know, I think what would be relevant today is just your background in terms of the context of the discussion that we're talking about. And then a bit of background to the banning of Bain in the UK. And you know, it would be great if we could spend about 15 minutes on that. And then Prof Williams, if we could just talk about the rationale for suspending or debarring or sanctioning or restricting a supplier. Why would we do that? What is the rationale behind that and the basis for that? And then, you know, let's talk a little bit about why Bain Co should be restricted or debarred and banned. I think there's some questions I've got as to why they may not be, and we could do that. If Johan has joined us by then I'd certainly love to get Johan's perspective on that as well. And then I've got a couple of points just to talk about the mechanisms. What do we have in South Africa that would restrict or debar a supplier, and talk through that, and then we can open that to a discussion. Athol, tell us a little bit about yourself, but if I can just quickly kick off with a question: why are you in the UK? I mean, you're a South African-born professional. I think in what I've seen in many of the social media reports, you have a love of the country. Why are you in the UK?
Yes, Sean, thank you. I'm in the UK for quite tragic reasons. I testified before the Zondo Commission last year for 2 days and implicated 39 parties in my testimony. I submitted a 700-page affidavit that not only exposed Bain's role in state capture, but many of the other parties as well. Many of them today prominent business leaders and political leaders. And the day of my final testimony, I was at home with my family, kind of feeling quite good that I've done my service to my country, and we were celebrating. And I got a call from an international NGO called PLAF. They work with whistleblowers around the world, but particularly focused on Africa. They're also, the founder of PLAF is the lawyer for Edward Snowden. And the woman who called me said, and I'd known her because PLAF had provided some legal support for me for my testimony. And on that day, she said to me, they are extremely worried about my safety, given the testimony they've watched me deliver. And I was surprised by this, thinking, well, I've just given my testimony, surely my danger goes away. And what she had said was, what I'd uniquely done is firstly expose very powerful people. Secondly, I provide hard evidence. It wasn't just what I'd heard or seen, but I provided documentary evidence. I had emails of, between people. I had documents where it listed the names of the people who had met with Jacob Zuma and Bain and others. I had the documents of what was discussed at those meetings. And she said to me that when they've seen witnesses give such strong evidence, link so many parties, they actually end up being in grave danger. So she suggested that I leave the country that day for my safety. But I didn't take it too seriously. I mean, I was disturbed, but didn't know what to do with it. So we kind of just clamped up at home, didn't leave our apartment, kind of lived in fear. And then two further things happened. One was actually next week we'll be celebrating the sad 1-year anniversary of Babita Deokaran being assassinated. And I didn't know Babita, I didn't know of her before the assassination. But what it did was make real this risk of assassinating whistleblowers for what we're doing. And that just sent shockwaves through the whistleblower community. It really shocked and shook me. And so from August of last year, I kind of just didn't answer my phone, just kind of, hunkered down, wouldn't go out and visit my mother in Cape Town. I just wouldn't leave, thinking there are going to be people after me. I had knocks on my door when I opened the front door and there'd be no one there. Phone calls where there's no one at the end of the phone call. And so these might have been just random things, but how do you know? And then the final straw was when a former senior government official, friend of mine, wrote to me saying that, Athol, you are in the crosshairs. Those are the words he used. Because bizarre things started happening. Like, I wrote to the presidency looking for support and protection, and I wouldn't get a reply. I had an academic job at UCT, and they strongly suggested that I resign. And more, I was getting the signs that, we didn't want you around. And so in November of last year, I packed up one bag, quietly left Cape Town, and have been in the UK since.
Your family's still here? You actually don't answer that question. Yeah. I was pleased to see, I think you've got a role now at one of the universities there, and you're doing something.
So the reason I came to the UK, it was the easiest option because I'd started actually this doctorate. I hadn't finished it. I started in 2018 and put it on hold when I got involved with the state capture investigations. And so I still had that visa. And so the easiest way for me to get out of South Africa was to just come to the UK as a student. So I'm here as a student. I can't work, can't earn money. So for 3 years, I haven't had an income. And while I'm here, I can't earn, which, as anyone who's traveled to the UK knows, that with your few rands you've got, it goes nowhere. It does nothing for you. Yeah. So I'm here as a student, finishing my doctorate, and I've got 2 teaching posts. It's quite funny, the part-time teaching posts that don't collectively, for the whole term, doesn't pay for 1 month's rent. Right, so that's where I am.
Athol, tell us a bit about the background now to the banning of Bain in the UK, and what happened, and why did they take those steps?
Sure. Just to link that my background then to this point around the banning of Bain, I was a partner at Bain. I joined Bain in 1995 as an intern in Boston. I was doing my MBA at the MIT Sloan School, and so I spent 10 weeks with Bain back then already. So my journey with Bain starts in 1995. When I finished my MBA in 1996, 10 days after finishing my MBA, I was at Bain as a full-time consultant. And for me, Bain, remember this was 1996, so just 2 years after the fall of apartheid. And I was an engineer in South Africa, had the most awful time. Being a black engineer in those days, linked to the mining industry, was just shocking. I worked in Krugersdorp and Boksburg and Bronkhorstspruit. I mean, just miserable time. And in many ways, Bain were Bain represented for me, they were my saviors in a way. I don't know, put too grand a label on it, but it was rags to riches. Firstly, right? I end up, I'm the sort of poor student. When I get to the US in 1994, I'm homeless because I haven't got the money to pay for anything. I end up being employed by Bain, have an amazing career at Bain. And so I go from, being treated like a leper in Bronkhorstspruit to being flown around first class by Bain, meetings all over the world, training in Monte Carlo, right? So it's an amazing experience. And over the next 25 years, I work in business. I'm at Bain, I leave Bain, I come back to Bain, and we establish this amazing relationship over a long period of time, where even when I'm not employed by Bain, I continue to help them develop their staff. I continue to give input to the work they're doing. I continue to connect them to clients. So it really is a friendship over many years. In 2010, I left Bain. I was a partner in the Johannesburg office. So I worked in Boston, New York, London, and then in Johannesburg. And so so Bain wasn't this mystical figure for me, because I think in South Africa, no one knows what Bain is. We think they're a PR agent or they're an accounting firm. But Bain is an incredibly powerful business consulting firm that works at the highest levels of multinationals and governments. One of their partners was Mitt Romney, who was almost president of the US. Bain are all the thinking and arms and legs behind the World Economic Forum. It's the reason Bain could get as close to Jacob Zuma as they did, because of the power and influence they have. They're the only consulting firm and only company we talk about when we talk about state capture to have had those clandestine meetings with our president, right? Up to 18 times behind closed doors, after hours, meeting with our president. So a foreign company staffed by foreigners meeting our president up to 18 times, when none of these meetings are in anyone's diary, right? This is why I particularly am focused on Bain. So I'm in business. I ended up being strategy director of Old Mutual, an amazing career. And then in 2018, Bain gets into trouble with SARS, and they call for my help. And so my help comes in sort of three forms. One, I've got credibility in South Africa. Two, I know their business. And three, my academic expertise is in business ethics. So I bring those to bear. And unfortunately, Bain were proved to be very insincere in both wanting to do the right thing in South Africa, which was my intention, and secondly, wanting to actually make real amends for what they've done. So I write all of this in my affidavit to the Zondo Commission. I write all of this in my book, Deep Collusion, basically saying it was a grand cover-up. If there's a copy of the book you got there. Sean's doing advertising for me. And so I, as a South African, my contract, Sean, with Bain, and this is public, my contract, I wrote it with Bain. I said, I will help you under the following terms. My interest is South Africa first, right? Then Bain. And everything I was going to do, it says in my contract, would be in the interest of South Africa. I was not there. People have called me the Bain fixer. I was not a Bain fixer, right? I was there to make sure Bain did the right thing. This is why I had multiple meetings with Judge Nugent of the Nugent Commission. I even wrote a report to the Nugent Commission. So my goal was to say, Bain, I can help you because I know you, but my interest is to do the right thing for South Africa. And the moment it became obvious to me that Bain did not share that intent, that's when I blew the whistle and went public. And so jumping ahead to what happened in the UK, our intent, well, my intent, and then I became connected with Lord Hayne in the UK. And people know Lord Hayne is a former South African, grew up in South Africa. He's an anti-apartheid activist, but spent most of his life in the UK, became a UK politician, and is now in the House of Lords in the UK. And Lord Hayne was campaigning against global companies who had been involved in corruption in South Africa. And, it's one of those things where it's serendipitous, I guess, in some ways, or fortuitous, because I'd come to the UK in desperation, and I watched and heard Lord Haynes speaking, and suddenly I saw a connection there. Information, but he had access and influence. And so we agreed to combine those two. And so every time Lord Haynes spoke in Parliament about corruption or about state capture or about South Africa, I would make sure he had some information linked to Bain, linked to state capture, linked to what I thought was happening in South Africa. So much so that the pressure kept mounting in the UK. Right. And it came to a head beautifully at the end of July, because what happened was, because of Lord Haynes pressurizing, the UK Prime Minister then called for an investigation. So already that was a powerful move. The UK investigation then met with Bain numerous times here in the UK. And the government's investigation concluded that there was nothing wrong, nothing to see, right? And this is the power again of Bain, both in its influence, but in its ability to make even the most heinous things seem plausible and right. Mm. And we've seen that now with their newspaper ads and their PR, right? It's all plausible. It seems like actually they are right. And a whole government department in the UK met with them and were convinced there was nothing wrong. When Lord Haynes and I met, and I'll end with this. When Lord Haynes and I met with the cabinet minister in charge 3 weeks ago, he basically said to us, he said, look, I'm giving you this meeting as a courtesy. My advisors have all said there's nothing to do here, but I'm giving you 20 minutes to, state your case. And this is the power of facts, right? I basically, having seen Bain's narrative, had literally just prepared a case that just pointed out the lies in the narrative and produced documents. Mm. So again, I said, because Bain has said, Athol Williams is untruthful. Athol Williams wasn't even at Bain when these things happened. And I say it's irrelevant. So yes, assume I'm a liar and I wasn't there when this happened, which is true. But look at the documents. These are Bain documents. So that's all I did, was present those things to the minister. And in 20 minutes, he was convinced. And we then saw them bring the ban in the UK.
Right, right. And you had access to that detail because of the role that you were given.
Yes.
To look into this and to, for them to fix Bain, but for you to do what's right for South Africa. Thanks, Athol. Let me just quickly share, for those that haven't seen, there's a lot of stuff that's being pushed out at the moment. Bain Company put in the Sunday papers here this weekend, as well as last week. A big advert. They have got a website as well that explains a lot of the stuff that they believe happened at SARS. But there's a lot of questions that are being asked about that. And I think there's particularly the acting DG at Treasury has also spoken out about what's going on. Let's talk now about, we can ask Prof Williams to come in. Prof, tell us a little bit about the whole censure, sanction, restriction, debarment principle, and in particular, why is it that governments would restrict suppliers? Surely it's got to be more than just, well, you're guilty, we're going to fine you. Why restrict? Why do that? Prof, I did introduce you earlier, and just to also, one of your books, one of your many books as well, this one is Public Procurement Regulations, that described your role, and I did read that out earlier. Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Athol, for that. And I just want to say, Athol, I'm a big fan. Like, I watched your testimony at Zondo, and even there, when you put it, I was like, this guy is playing with fire. I'm like, so I'm not surprised that you had all those things happen, because And when he did that, I was like, why is this guy so bold? Like, what's his insurance policy like? Honestly. But I also want to just say thank you for I mean, I can't imagine the scale of what you've been through, but I want to say on behalf of people who are interested in change, thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you've done and that you're continuing to do. Okay, so back to the topic. So Sean, thank you for that book, but I actually have a more relevant book on debarment, which I wrote 10 years ago now, called Fighting Corruption in Public Procurement, and Analysis of Debarment and Disqualification Measures. So why do we have debarment? A bit of history, if you like. It was popularized by the US government because the US procurement regulations are the oldest in the world, traced back to the Civil War, 1861. And we've had debarment in the US for a while, and many countries have copied that. And agencies like the World Bank, the development banks have pushed it in countries. And so it's now a feature of all procurement systems. And what is debarment? You can define it in different ways, but it's basically when a government contractor, supplier, is excluded from government contracts, either for a period of time, as we've seen with the Bain debarment, which is for 3 years, or sometimes you're excluded from bidding on a particular procurement process. So generally, we have debarments for, I say three reasons. The first one is that it's used as a tool to support government policies. So in terms of corruption, it's used to support anti-corruption policies, right? And it sort of sends a message that government will not tolerate certain kind of activity that is not in consonance with what the government believes or how the government wants to project itself. Of course, every government wants to project itself as, being not favorably disposed to corruption. But we use debarment for other things apart from corruption. So for instance, in the UK, debarment can relate to things like counterterrorism, sexual offenses, drug trafficking, taxation offenses, money laundering, etc., etc. So there's a wide variety of offenses that could trigger your debarment or exclusion country. In South Africa, we see it more in terms of obviously BEE, but also fraud and corruption as well. So it's designed to support government policy. It also is supposed to have, in some countries, a punitive and deterrent effect. Of course, if you are publicly debarred, as Bain has been, that is, it creates a reputational risk. It creates reputational damage, and it can actually affect a company's ability to obtain business from other sectors. Because other sectors, private sector can look at Bain and think, you know what, I don't really want to do business with you because I don't know what you're going to come with. So it has a punitive effect, and the idea is that hopefully other companies will say, look, the risk of committing these offenses, so let's say corruption in this case, or integrity offenses, the risk of committing these integrity offenses is too high, because if we get debarred, that can affect our business in other sectors. That could lead to financial losses. In fact, in the US, they define debarment as a corporate death penalty, because it can have really devastating impacts on companies. But it increases the cost of corruption. And so if you're an anti-corruption person, then you like it because it makes corruption a lot more expensive for people to do if they are caught and debarred. The other thing that it does is that it can have a risk management or a protective rationale. So we're trying to protect the government finances from people that have proven themselves to be unethical. Because the idea is that if you can prove yourself to be unethical in one test case, then, at such a grand scale, then likely that is the character of the company, and that will seep through in other contracts, other areas. So those are the rationales. Now, as I said, debarment is very, very popular. Every country that has procurement regulations has debarment. And I've said it also applies to a wide variety of infractions. So it can be triggered for, things it can be triggered for offenses that are not related to procurement. So now it's very common with modern slavery, money laundering, counterterrorism, things like that. And in the UK and the US, sexual offenses as well. And it can also be triggered for breaches of procurement rules. So in South Africa, for instance, and even in the UK as well, you can be excluded or debarred for committing an offense within a particular procurement tender process, or you can be debarred from procurement for past procurement violations. So your violations can, there are many violations that could trigger a debarment or exclusion, but those are kind of the rationales for debarment. I think the other thing that I should say about debarment is that many jurisdictions, but not South Africa, also have they have a mechanism for companies to rehabilitate themselves and be readmitted to procurement. So they call it self-cleaning or rehabilitation measures. So sometimes if you have a company that has committed an offense that should lead to debarment, the company can say, look, you know what, when we did that, we had this board in place, we've taken the board out, we've taken our management out, we've put in an integrity compliance program, we're a different person now. And if the public sector is convinced, then they can say, okay, yes, you did commit, but we are convinced that you're now a different person, so we won't debar you, as long as you maintain your new character. So I think that's in a nutshell what I can say. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Let's move on to the next point, which was why should Bain be restricted or debarred in South Africa? And maybe we could just kick off then from Athol's perspective, and just give us a few things, Athol, just from your perspective as to why they should be, because this happened a long time ago, right? It's not recent, so and they're claiming they've done lots of things, they've cleansed, they've fixed things up, and so they're saying leave us alone.
Sean, my end game is not debarment or Bain being banned. That's not my end game. That's a means to an end in terms of my strategy, to the extent that's got any relevance.
Interesting.
For me, what I think Bain needs to offer South Africa is two things. They're not very simple things, but two things. One is full disclosure of what happened during those state capture years. And I've got very specific requirements. So I can name the documents they must reveal. I can name the people they must put forward as witnesses. So that's what I mean by full disclosure. Not ads in the paper, not fancy presentations, just those documents and those people as witnesses. So Bain needs to do full disclosure and make full amends. And the full amends is to the institutions they damaged and the people they damaged. So that's my end game, right? So I'm not, and it's amazing what Prof Williams has did is laid out very clearly. My interest isn't punishment or punitive. My interest is to get to my end game, which is full disclosure and amends. Why do I want full disclosure? Well, we can't have proper justice in South Africa until we know exactly who these people are, what they did, so we can either prosecute them or, importantly, cleanse them from our institutions. Because what I've argued again, why Bain different from anyone else, many of the other companies were involved in the execution of the state capture plans. Bain was involved in the designing of these plans. In fact, I would go so far as say Bain never looted, right? You can accuse other companies of looting. Bain never looted. Bain sat and designed these plans, and that's why I'm particularly worried about them being in our country. And by the way, Prof Williams used this great phrase, the character of the company. That was the essence of my argument to the UK government, saying, don't be fooled by this idea that Bain presents of, this happened in South Africa, a little outpost, right? The character of the company is Bain is one global partnership, one. It's a global partnership. So now as a partner, my bonus was impacted what happens in India, what happens in Venezuela. We move around all the time. Everything is done as one partnership. So what's happened in South Africa was part of the Bain global central strategy. It was their culture. It was the way they did things. And so when Bain argued, we've done the self-cleansing that Prof Williams talks about, I said, there's been no self-cleansing. Where's the self-cleansing? Not a single person at Bain was fired for what was done. Even Masoni, who headed up the South African business, it took them 3 months to negotiate a paid settlement with him, right? Hardly the horror of this guy did wrong, we should fire him.
You're talking about the Italian now.
That's right. So all the people, if you think about, Bain had 60 consultants working on the SARS project. Some have left the firm, but all the others are still at the firm, but just rotated around the global system, right? So I can name them, which I did for the UK government, and if the South African government ever contacts me, I will name them. I can tell you their names, what they've done, and where they are now. And so Bain says, oh, we've self-cleansed in South Africa. Look, we've got new leadership. They haven't got new leadership. They've brought in people from the system and just moved them around. Right? The current head of Bain South Africa, Stephen York, was mentored by Vittorio Massoni, right? I mean, Massoni was his mentee. So this idea of self-cleansing is a complete joke. So to your question of why should Bain be banned, I think it's because Bain have shown a complete disdain for justice in our country. They've shown complete disregard for the welfare of South Africans. They keep talking about protecting the 80 jobs of their staff, which I can respect. But what about the 60 million South Africans who have been impacted by state capture and who they continue to profit from? And so this is a company in many ways, Sean, that have shown themselves to have no interest in the welfare of South Africa. So I then say the punitive measures are valid, but I still want it as a conditional ban. It says, we will ban you, not until you self-cleanse, but until you come clean on make full disclosure and make full amends.
Prof, is that something that happens, that those debarments are conditional? And do you think that the process of banning them could then help Athol achieve his goals?
So yeah, we do
disclosure?
We do have these conditional debarments where a country will say you are banned until you do XYZ. And that XYZ can be as narrow as broad as the country determines, right? So it can have all these things that Athol is calling for, or different things. In the US, there's a very big compliance industry designed exactly for that, to put into place what a company needs to do, to actually make amends, to reform. I mean, South Africa is unique because, and I think Athol has really shed light on it, on the fact that many companies that are involved in integrity failures, in corruption scandals, a lot of them take a different tack than Bain did. So they admit there's voluntary disclosure and they say, yes, we did wrong. We put our hands up. We shouldn't have done that. And we're going to fix it. But Bain has consistently said, we made some mistakes, but what's the big deal? And for me, if you read the Nugent reports, it's actually heartbreaking. Like it's like an emotional punch to the gut, because what they did is so horrendous, and so the only word I can think of is evil in terms of what they planned for South Africa. And I mean, we know South Africa has so many challenges already. That's people intentionally doing that. It's like, this is not just about corporate profits. There's something, there's something sinister and evil about the way they actually approach the work. Refunding their fees is like, okay. But the damage to the South African economy, I think many of you will remember we had to have a VAT increase after 15 or 20 years of no increases, not just because of economic issues, but because SARS had lost its ability to recover taxes. They gutted the compliance department. They gutted the recovery department. It's like, even a toddler reading that would be like, how is this a restructuring plan? Like, even a crazy person would be like, this is not a restructuring plan. This is crazy. So it was so awful that, and their continuous insistence on, this was a mistake. We had issues with the leadership at SARS. Even the excuses are insulting. And for me, and I'll say this as a Black person, you get the impression that it is, again, white corporates thinking Black people don't matter. And we can do whatever we like to them because Black people don't matter. Africans don't matter. Africa doesn't matter. And you see that thread coming out. And it's like, but we do matter. And you've damaged us in a way that we still haven't recovered from. I mean, this is what, 2014, 2015. We are still struggling. We we haven't even started the journey of coming out from the stuff that they do. And I like what Athol said, that theirs was a lot more agreed to and not to deliver and not to perform, but we can recover from that. But when somebody, recovery is not just about, the recovery measures are different, the interventions you need are different, and they haven't done anything in good faith to actually address that. And I would encourage people to read the Nugent report, Commission report. It's on the internet, a bit long, but if you go to the cogent sections, you will see to yourself that this was wrong on all levels. I mean, we deal with integrity issues and procurement scandals all the time, and we read them and they're awful, but this was at a much deeper level, because this was no longer, we talk about in anti-corruption studies, we talk about individualized corruption where, okay, there are bad eggs here and there, but this was not that situation. This was, we would dismantle the South African capacity, public sector capacity to function, to recover. We would ensure that we're not looting from contracts, because contracts are limited in their scope, right? Contracts, okay, a big contract, 10 million, 20 million, whatever, 500 billion, whatever, but we're going to take the money from source. So we don't even have to have contracts, because we're ensuring that we can take the money as it's collected by the revenue collection agency, and that is evil. That is evil.
Just from my perspective as well, I mean, one of the things that I saw in one of the World Bank reports was where they peaked a debarment, they saw a reduction in corruption, and that was a message to others. There's a consequence, and we know we've got a challenge in our country. And so there's let me just quickly put to you as well that this is broader than just Bain, because we've got a number of different organizations, and we raised this a couple of months ago on this platform, that all of the organizations that were identified in the PPE report by the SIU, Special Investigations Unit, none of them have been restricted. And that happened during lockdown, and how many of them are still around and possibly involved in the KZN cleanup as a result of the floods, because it didn't happen. So I think it's a lot broader than just Athol, any comments? And then I just want to possibly share some mechanisms and what next steps might be.
Sean, just a few thoughts. I absolutely agree. It's a lot wider than Bain. People have asked me, why am I so obsessed with Bain? And I've said, well, as a campaigner, I'm going to focus on where I've got some unique information and insight. I'm hoping there are whistleblowers in each of the other companies to come forward and do the same. And that's sadly been lacking. And I think this is what goes against our justice efforts and our anti-corruption efforts, is how poor whistleblowers are treated. Because if anyone is thinking of being a whistleblower against corruption or anything massive, they look at my experience and all the other state capture whistleblowers and say, there's no way I'm speaking up. And so for me, this is another cynical pro-state capture move by our government in not supporting whistleblowers. It's for me why Business Leadership South Africa and Business Unity South Africa won't support me, because it's a subtle way of actually helping their corrupt buddies. Because if Athol's silenced, then these problems do go away. So just a last comment on Bain. My thought, and then Prof Williams described it so powerfully in the level of disdain again that they had for our country, and I can attest to that, and being in the meetings. There was even a time within Bain where I was in a meeting with a whole bunch of partners, all white, and I mean no disrespect to white people, but it was them saying, actually blacks can't do this job. And they sort of then saw me in the room, or just realized I was in the room, and saying, no, Athol, you're the exception, right? And this is the attitude, right? It's, look at their leadership. I post on social media, they're partners. They've got these quotes about being committed to diversity and inclusion. And then their partners are all middle-aged white men.
All three,
right?
Of them. Yeah.
3 of them. And it just smacks and drips of insincerity again, Sean. that everything they say, they're saying they want dialogue with South Africa. And I'm saying, you had the Nugent Commission where you didn't send your witnesses. You had the Zondo Commission. You know, the Nugent Commission made a full day available to Bain in 2018. Literally, Judge Nugent said to Bain, I'll give you a full day. You decide what you want to do, who you bring, what witnesses, what documents. What did Bain say? They refused it, right?
Interesting.
So there is no sincerity in the intent to want to change anything. And so I think we as South Africans must begin to see this as an attack on our society. Last comment is, and to remember, I've been banging on about this for 3 years now. Bain did not only work at SARS, right? We only know about SARS because SARS collapsed. So take what happened at SARS and imagine what's happening at Telkom, at DBSA, at the PIC, at the IDC, or where Bain worked during that Zuma eras. The exact same model was replicated, right? Bain groomed Moyani for a year. They also groomed Sipho Maseko at Telkom for a year. So again, we should be very worried about this company being in our country.
They had a blueprint, multiple blueprints. I think you actually mentioned it in the book how many they had done on the restructuring of multiple entities. And let's talk about the options in South Africa. And this is just to try and make us a bit practical. From my perspective, there are two sources that we have for the restriction of bidders. There's one thing called the Register of Tender Defaulters, and there's a database of restricted suppliers. Both of these can be found on the National Treasury website. And if you go to the bottom of the website, you'll find the Register of Tender Defaulters. You don't have to do this, Athol. I'll show you what's there now. If you go to the Register of Tender Defaulters, you'll see that there's nothing there. And Prof Williams can probably add a little bit to this. What my understanding is that the only time somebody is put on this register is when the prosecutor in a court case instructs or requests that the offending party be put on this register. And what I understand is that's not happening. It's not happening through a court process, and at the end of the court process, the prosecutors are not saying this. In my 20-something years that I've been looking at this, I have only seen 2 names on this once, and that was in some raid scandal of some sort that happened a couple of years ago. Nothing since then. So the chance of us using this particular process to get Bain or anyone else on is going to require a whole court process, and then we're going to have to really fight with the National Prosecuting Authority to make sure that the prosecutors instruct that they're meant to get put onto this. The other one that we have is the database of restricted suppliers. And this one has got a number of different suppliers on it. This one is managed by the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer in National Treasury. And there's a process that is followed to get these suppliers. And they put both the supplier, the PTY Limited, as well as the directors are included on this particular register. And this information is then fed through into what we call the Central Supplier Database. And that Central Supplier Database lists all of these restricted companies, and whenever a department or public entity, an organ of state, contracts for goods or services, or they receive a quotation, they're supposed to go to this particular CSD, the Central Supplier Database, and have a look at whether the director or the company has been restricted. And if they are, then typically that doesn't result in an award. So we have a mechanism that does work, and this is the database of restricted suppliers. Now, there was an instruction that came out earlier this year. It came out on the 31st of March, effective the 1st of April, where it spelled out very clearly what the process should be to restrict bidders or persons from doing business with government. And basically it starts off with the accounting officer or the accounting authority, the board, writing to notify that particular person or that organization of their intention to restrict them, what the grounds are for that restriction, the intended period of that, and then giving them right to make representation within 40 days as to why they should not be restricted. So the process starts off with the organ of state then writing to that supplier and saying, we have the intention of restricting you. This is why. Give us a response back. Up to 10 years. The response obviously then would come back from the supplier concerned. That would be considered. They would then notify National Treasury of their decision and what should happen. National Treasury will then look at that and consider whether they should actually restrict them or not. And then if National Treasury then has decided to restrict them, to put them on this database, they will communicate with them. They may even ask for additional information if need be. That's the process that would follow. And once National Treasury has done this, and this when we say National Treasury, this is actually the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer would go through this process. So that's all we've got at the moment, as far as I am aware. And we've got lots of other folk that are online now. They could quickly chip in if they're aware of anything else. But Prof, from your perspective, yeah, I mean, I was intrigued to note the approach that Athol said they used in the UK was, approaching a minister. The minister got an investigation going. There was then a report back, but then eventually there was a ministerial decision to say these guys need to be banned.
Yeah.
From your perspective.
So the UK approach was interesting, and it concerns me a little bit because even in the UK, just like in South Africa here, like from these instructions you've said, the exclusion should be done by a contracting authority, right? So I'm assuming that the minister would have covered, obviously the legal basis not to leave himself open to challenge. In South Africa, just to point out, the register for tender defaulters that you mentioned, it is empty because it only applies to a very, very narrow range of offenses that are in the Corruption Act. So those offenses are bribery in public procurement or bid rigging under Section 12 and Section 13 of the Corruption Act. And yes, and the inclusion or the debarment or inclusion on the tender defaulters list is because the court determines that as part of your punishment for this type of corruption in procurement, you will be debarred. So if there is no case, and we know there are no procurement corruption cases going, because corruption is very hard to prove, yada, yada, yada. If there isn't a case, and also if the case does not relate to a Section 12 or Section 13 offense, there can be no inclusion in the register of tender defaulters. You are right, it's only happened twice where the people were put on in 2004 for 10 years and their names taken off in 2014. Now, the database of restricted suppliers is an administrative debarment done by the accounting authority for offenses that are listed in the Treasury regulations and as well as the PPPFA regulations, right? So those have extensive rules, offenses you can commit that could lead to your debarment. And it's being used a lot more, obviously. We have now, 113 people there, about 27 people since 2020. So I don't know if any of these are COVID contracts or not, but it's easier for accounting authorities, for organs of state to put contractors on that database. So in South Africa, this would be the easiest option for a company like Bain to be debarred. So any of the departments that Bain is working with or has worked with can say, you know what, based on what we've investigated, give Bain notice, tell us why we shouldn't restrict you. And if the answers are not satisfactory, then we can restrict for up to 10 years. So, but again, I think Athol has pointed to the fact that the public sector may not be keen on, on punishing companies for whatever reason. But we do have the legal system that allows us to do this if we have the willingness to.
But it sounds like we're going to have to start with the institution concerned. The
Yes.
organ of state is going to have to start that. And if we just then focus on SARS, is that where we would need to start?
Yes.
Somebody in SARS is going to have to write a letter to Bain and say, this is the grounds for debarring you. They would then respond. That commissioner would then have to write then to Treasury and say, this is the decision, and then through that process that will then happen.
Yeah. So it's
Now,
easy enough to do if they want to, but it's the willingness that is the issue, I guess.
And so we've got to find somebody then in SARS who's willing to do that, or in another institution.
Yeah.
Athol,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
I think the point that Professor Williams mentions of the political will, or just the will, the leadership will to do something, I think that's what's lacking, Sean, in this instance, in many of our social ills in South Africa, actually, but we'll leave those aside, is we lack this leadership will. And the closing of my testimony at the Zondo Commission, I talked about our need for entering the era of the brave. And I think we're in such a hole in South Africa that there are no clean, easy ways out. We need some brave people, courageous people to say, I will stand up and do something, even if I know there's going to be some blowback. And this is what I think we need from our leaders. Right? Even, why we've got a British politician in Lord Hayne takes it upon himself to go and do this repeatedly in the UK government. Not a single South African politician at national, provincial, or local level has done anything like this. Why not? Where's the courage? Where's the full commitment to the good of our people that says, even if there's blowback and I lose sponsors and I lose supporters, I'm going to act and do what's right for our country. And so we're not seeing it in the political, we're not seeing it in business for sure, and we're not seeing it even at the institutions. And I think that's what we need. The law is there, exactly as Prof Williams says, but if we lack the will as South Africans to say, I'm going to do this for the good of my country, that law and those institutions are meaningless.
So there are a couple of people, I'm not going to point them out, who are in SARS, who are on this call. And I know that if they were to say, okay, I'm brave enough, I'm going to listen to Athol's message and I'm going to be courageous about doing something on this. But where do I start? I wasn't even around at the time. What would I put in that document? Here's the request, Athol. Could you help them out? Could you point out the specific things that that you would say could go into that letter?
Sure.
And help them put that together.
I am practically working full-time on 5 different investigations that are happening in the country. Remember, not being paid at all.
Yeah.
So I would gladly point people to where they can find the right information and how they can do it. I'm not a legal expert,
Sure.
all of that.
So could you say, these are the page numbers in my book?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go to these and extract it and put that together.
It's exactly.
Thank you. Prof, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I will say a person should have a look at Treasury regulations. We have regulation 16A9, which tells us what kinds of offenses can trigger debarments outside of Corruption Act and outside of the triple PFA. So, and I mean, Bain has probably contravened quite a few of those. So that would be the place that, because you have to have a legal basis for that. And you have to say, this is the regulation that Bain has contravened. And as a result, our law says they have to be debarred, that we should consider debarring them. So that's where I'll say someone should start. The other thing is that maybe the NPA can decide that they want to take legal action against against Bain because there definitely would have been a breach of especially Section 12 of the Corruption Act, which can lead to putting them on the register for tender defaulters. So I would say, look at the legal basis, look at what Bain has done. I mean, the facts are out there, and let's start with that. But we must always remember that to do anything, there must be a legal basis for it. Otherwise, it would be challenged and thrown out, and that would not be, that's not what we want.
I saw a hand earlier. I just invite anyone to ask questions if they would like. And I did see Advocate Ntsuluba was on earlier as well, and would love to hear her perspectives if she'd like to come in. There are a couple of you. Hey, Masichaba, welcome. You can unmute.
Thank you. Okay, thank you to you and the panel. And thank you for a very interesting topic. Yeah, I've got a number of questions. And let me also commend the speakers on the nice presentation which they have made. I think my worry on these issues, the risk that we are facing as a country, especially when we get to be tested in courts once we start implementing some of the things, we might be found wanting on consistency. Because I've just looked at the database of restricted suppliers as you were going through it, and I realized that a lot of those kind of transgressions are happening all over. Others choose to blacklist, and others choose not to blacklist. And that poses a kind of a consistency risk. And it also poses security risks to those who are doing it, because they might be perceived as pursuing their own agendas. So we don't have consistent processes. And in my question, I'm just wondering to say, what is the role of the assurance providers, like your auditors in this instance? Because those rules are there and they are there to be implemented and adhered to. Do we audit them? Do we issue findings against those that are not doing their responsibilities? And are those who are not doing their responsibilities in terms of blacklisting, are they being held to account in one way or the other? Because when you are sitting on a position, you are there to do what that position demands. And that might include to restrict service providers to report the wrong things that are not happening. Another wrong is not necessarily you doing the wrong yourself, but you overlooking it and not disposing your fiduciary duties in terms of curbing that kind of a wrong. So who's looking at those that are sitting on positions of authorities and what they are doing and what they are not doing, and taking them on that basis? And then I think lastly, then it's the cleansing. I think the cleansing, we need to look at it. We must have the criteria that we say, if you meet this criteria, maybe we say, maybe what you have done, there isn't, as an example, an intention for fraud, then you can cleanse. But we cannot leave it up to the service providers to decide, I will do the cleansing issue. It's like when somebody has killed someone, and then you decide, okay, I will rehabilitate myself. But the reality is the crime is done and you must pay for the crime that you have done. But perhaps for someone who has a drinking problem and it's a light issue that is not necessarily a transgression, we can say, you're fine, go and rehabilitate yourself. So what is the process around the cleansing? Who should we allow to go through this process and we say we are fine? And who can we say cleansing is not enough? And those should be the clear guidances and criteria, which when it gets tested in the court of law, we will be able to pass. And it can also not be susceptible for abuse, because people will just decide they go the softer route, because we also accept that one. Because if we do it in that way, I can tell you the weaker businesses like your SMMEs, like I read in that database, there will be a fall for the blacklisting. And the big ones like your Bain, then they will do the cleansing. So where do we draw the line? And then, so I think, let me just leave it there.
Good one, Master Chava. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Prof Williams, is there any precedent or any practice elsewhere that we could potentially learn from to help with this issue which Mr. Child has raised? You know, if I'm sitting now in the institution and I'm writing then to Bain, you know, I'm setting myself up. You know, I'm going to be the one that's going to be potentially, you know, receive that phone call, and I'm going to have to do what Athol has done. Is there anything that we can maybe learn from elsewhere?
So a couple of things. So I just wanted to take it back to the UK and Bain just for a second, something I didn't mention. So the UK debarred Bain under their provisions relating to gross professional misconduct. Okay, that's what the provision says. And South Africa, we actually have a very similar, so that's like a general catch-all phrase. You know, you've just behaved badly. That's what it means. South Africa, we have something very specific where we can exclude someone who has abused our supply chain management system. Or yes, we have that in regulation 1689, as I spoke about under the Treasury regulations. So that's something that we can use. But it must come either from Treasury or from the accounting authority. So if Treasury, you know, decides that this is an important issue, Treasury themselves can say, can set the ball rolling. So that's possible, you know, and, you know, I mean, Treasury is a big organization. If they decide that, you know, they'll be acting as one, there wouldn't be anybody that we can pinpoint and that can be victimized. So that's what I would say would be the best thing that we do, because it does look strange that, you know, the UK is doing this and South Africa is we're still just pretending everything is fine when it's not. The other thing that I'll say about, I mean, I think Athol is best placed to discuss the lack of whistleblowing protection. And I think we've seen it over and over again, and it is intentional. And I think Athol has mentioned that. And I think any politician, the reason why politicians or people don't, even if they have good intent, they don't have the moral courage because they don't want to end up like Athol. You know, nobody wants to have to flee for their lives, you know, and know that they're not going to get the state support that they need, because the state right now is not really interested in fighting corruption. Because if they were, we would have seen different things happening in the political space. So we don't have whistleblowing protection, which is why we are reliant on foreign agencies to try to support. But the other thing is that we have to keep, and I'm speaking, I don't know if other people know that I'm from Nigeria, which has more or less, I don't want to use the word collapse, but it's in a very dire state because of corruption, because of state capture. And as citizens, we have to keep fighting and pushing the boundaries, because otherwise there won't be much of a country left to live in, and that will affect regular people, the working class, the middle class, everyone who is not a political elite or a business mogul will be severely, significantly affected. And you can't understand the extent of what the impacts can have if we don't do things to address this monster. So I'll stop there. I don't know if I've answered that question.
Thanks, Prof. Let's just ask Tavella to come in, and then we'll ask Athol to respond to that. Go ahead, Tavella.
Thanks, Sean. What an interesting discussion today. Eh? It could have been on, televised on national TV. I think we need such discussions on a national scale. Eh? It should be a public discourse, this type of discussions. I'm so thrilled by it. Just a quick question. You've had the Zondo Commission, right? Now I'm wondering, with all the monies that was spent and all the time and effort that has gone into the Zondo Commission, what is the view from your guests in terms of how the Zondo Commission was conducted? And two, what now? Now that the Zondo Commission has been done, was that a political masking just to say we have looked into these things, or is there real affirmative actions that can really be taken on what transpired with the Zondo Commission? And lastly, do you think perhaps that the president has the authority to act on the findings and take some other maybe there's ways of him dealing with the sort of issues of corruption, or do you think he's been dealing with it appropriately as far as working within the rule of law in the country? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Athol. Do you want to respond to that one?
Sure, I'll respond to this, and just briefly, also just the previous comment. Just one small comment. I understand the law looking for self-cleansing. What I worry about is that often there isn't a legal requirement for reparations, and so and that's where you'll hear me harping on about full disclosure and amends. And in many ways, that's got to come before the self-cleansing. Because even in the UK, they go straight to self-cleansing, which means I can do wrong, and as long as I can show I'm a renewed being, then everything's fine. And I think that's a big mistake. We've got to insist on full disclosure and amends before we can talk about apologies and then self-cleansing. And by the way, I have, and this is in the media as well, I've designed a 6-step program that companies can go through to make amends. I've submitted this to the Zondo Commission. It's in Business Day articles, etc. You just Google it. Sort of the 6-step amends program. And what I recommended to the to the Zondo Commission was we actually set up some entity that can, in a way, vet companies for having gone through the right remedial actions. Because exactly as I think one of your participants asked, how do we know when a company has done enough? So how do we know what self-cleansing is? How do we know what amends is? And I think until we can be rigorous in saying, here are the things we must do in order to be fully cleansed and made amends, and some authority has reviewed it and said, yes, you are clean, go back and do work. So that's the issue on self-cleansing and amends. This question on the Zondo Commission, it's obviously a hot political potato, but the cost of the Zondo Commission, what it achieved, etc. Let me offer 2 criticisms and then maybe one thing in support. The one criticism is, for me, it seems the Zondo Commission, like most of South Africa, has diluted state capture, reduced it to looting and corruption. Now, I think that's for practical reasons, because we want to go after the money and the people who stole the money because we need that money back. So I understand that. But state capture is not just about corruption and looting. And in fact, in my book, Deep Collusion, I locate state capture halfway between corruption and a coup, right? State capture is an attack on our democratic institutions. It's repurposing how our government works. That's not about looting. You can have state capture with zero money being looted. You can have state capture just by repurposing our state institutions. So one thing, I think, for practical reasons, the Zondo Commission has focused a lot on the corruption and the looting, but I worry about us losing what really happened, which is state capture. The second thing I think with the Zondo Commission, again around practicality, is it's gone after a narrow set of entities. So for example, there was no telecom workstream. There was no DBSA workstream, right? So there's a lot about Transnet and Eskom, etc. And so I think it was done for practical reasons, but I think this has opened it up to the accusation of kind of going after particular parties and ignoring others.
The positive point?
Oh, the positive point was, I think there is intrinsic value in truth.
Yeah.
The Zondo Commission was a truth-finding exercise to reveal what happened, and justice must then follow. So how do we judge the Zondo Commission? We can't judge the Zondo Commission per se on people being in orange overalls. We've got to judge the Zondo Commission for, did it reveal the truth that we wanted to know? Because as I say, it's both, there's intrinsic value in the truth, but also truth is a prerequisite for justice. And so I think it's hard to judge the Zondo Commission on its own, because now we know stuff, but nothing has happened. But the fact that nothing's happened is not a judgment on the Zondo Commission, but on our law enforcement authorities.
Well, thanks, Athol. Advocate Nsuluba, just a quick one, and then we'll ask Verleen just a quick one, and then we'll ask our guest to close.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to our very able presenters on what I prefer to call the Truth and Reconciliation Corporate dissection. Allow me to be a bit naughty and say, you actually have a list, Section 16 PFMA list of those that have been declared. But my understanding is that this country is having an organ of state that must do external quality assurance, which is the Office of the Auditor General. And I'm then asking, in all this, where do you situate the Office of the Auditor General? I will cite an interesting instance that we're dealing with in this forum, where the outcome of the Competition Commission began to drive the AG to do something that is new, that of looking at directorship in terms of procurement processes and beginning to provide now audit findings, thus changing the trajectory of actual external verification within the public sector. It is for that reason that I'm asking, with the list that you have and the empty one that we have, where do we situate the role of the AG in ensuring that this discussion ends up locating the problem and the solution where it belongs? Thank you.
Good one, good one. Evelyn.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everybody. What an interesting session today, and always is. But I just want to say, it has been muted in various publications by Treasury that almost 800 billion is spent annually on the procurement of goods and services. It's amazingly that 800 billion that can be spent, we don't have systems in place always to look at those in terms of the system. So we come years later, and by the time some brave person will talk, then we have lost so much already in terms of all those values. And if we have to look clearly and come back and saying, are we going to put systems and processes in place annually, or if it's quarterly, whatever, before we get to those big numbers, and how much won't we lose as a country? Thank you.
Good one, Evelyn. Komotso, we'll give you a quick chance to go. Go ahead, Komotso.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you for bringing this great speakers. Athol, if our president, I'll give you the order of mention for bravery. Keep up doing the good work. Prof Williams, I appreciate you for the great work that you do in the public procurement space. Mine is just a quick one on this debarment. I see we tend to go for the small fish. If you look at the register currently, you'd see, I mean, there's one that it's debarred for claiming VAT when they are not VAT vendors. And sometimes it's just a silly mistake. You know, somebody just downloads an invoice that has 15% VAT there, and then they use it. They don't know that you need to be a VAT vendor to be registered. But we leave the big fish. We see how the Competition Commission, the finding on of the Competition Commission on the big construction companies, and to date they are still not blacklisted or debarred. And what do you think perhaps would be or should be done to maybe accounting officers and accounting authorities that fail to have those debarred? We can still go further to say even for institutions or companies that were really part of the Competition Commission, that like your EOH, for instance, that came out in the state capture. I mean, the institutions that use those, the services of those companies still have not done anything when there's evidence in the public domain that shows that these are deserving of debarment. What do you think should be done to those accounting officers that fail to have those debarred? Thank you.
Good one, Watson. I think that relates as well to the AG point that was made by Advocate. Prof Williams, closing comments, and then we'll ask Athol to close and maybe suggest the next steps. Go ahead, Prof.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the AG, I think actually the AG is one of the institutions that are really high functioning.
Yeah.
And you know that in 2019, the act was amended so they can impose personal debt orders on accounting officers that don't recover funds that have been lost to fraud and corruption or just lost. So I think the AG is doing well, but you have to remember that the AG's role is limited to auditing public sector organization, public agencies. They can't do anything to the private sector, right? So when they do their audits and they have adverse findings or whatever, they require certain things of accounting officers. If necessary, they impose a personal debt order on them. And that's where their work should end. The other thing they do is that they would then make reference to national treasury or provincial treasuries or the prosecuting authority. So it's those other agencies that maybe are not picking up the baton to take things further. But I think that the Auditor General, I think from my perspective, they're doing what they should be doing to the best of their ability. In terms of the other thing that she mentioned, it's escaped my mind. In terms of our accounting authorities not debarring people, that is a function of really national treasury and provincial treasuries, because they are the supervisors, especially when it comes to supply chain management. They are the supervisors of the accounting officer. So in some cases under our law, the accounting officer must debar. In other cases, they have a discretion. Of course, if they must debar and they don't do that, then that means that they fail to perform their duties adequately. Of course, if they have a discretion, then they can, then they can't be cited for failure. So that is a function of the National Treasury. And then the comment on why small companies rather, are debarred disproportionately, that is a global issue. Big companies have lawyers. They have the biggest lawyers. They have the funds to continue to fight. If you are a small municipality and you get a letter from Bowmans or Pinsons and Masons, you will cave because, do you understand? You don't want a problem, right? So the big lawyer, but the smaller companies, may not have in-house counsel, may not be able to afford the big lawyers. When they get the letter saying we're going to debar you, they say, okay. And that's a global problem. Everywhere you go, you have smaller firms being disproportionately debarred than bigger firms. And the other thing as well is that in countries that have a self-cleaning mechanism, South Africa doesn't, by the way, but countries that do have self-cleaning, it's easier for a large firm to self-cleanse because you can say we've removed the board, we've removed management, we brought new people. If you're a mom and pop shop, you can't go anywhere. So you can't reform in a way that will be acceptable to the debarring entity. So those are some of the problems that we have with the debarment mechanism as a whole, and they're not unique to South Africa or to African countries.
Thanks, Prof. Athol?
Sean, I want to just close with a call to action. We celebrated Women's Day recently, but the actual event was the marching of 20,000 women on the union buildings in opposition to past laws and broader oppression in our country. That was an example of us South Africans saying we see an attack on us and we are going to take action. I think we need that kind of reaction in South Africa. What's happened, it's been labeled treason. I've said it's an attack on our democratic institutions. And we seem to sort of sit in front of our TVs and go, yeah, that's bad, eh? But let's keep flipping the channels. And we don't seem to have this urgency, this outrage to do something. My view is a revolution's coming. We must decide what kind of revolution it's going to be. It could be a violent revolution like we saw start in July of last year, or it can be a moral revolution, which is what I think we need. And what this moral revolution needs is for each of us to begin to stand up, to hold our bosses accountable, to hold our politicians accountable. And so my closing comment is, everyone says, you can't find anyone who voted for apartheid, right? No one voted for apartheid. Everyone was against apartheid. Well, this is our new apartheid. This is our new liberation struggle. And in 20 years' time, when we're at the other end of this liberation struggle, people are going to ask us, what did you do during that new liberation struggle? And I certainly want to hold my head up higher and say, I did something. I spoke up. I did something, not something public, maybe something very small and quiet, but I did something for my country. And I'm calling on everyone on this call and all South Africans to say, I stood up to be counted during this new liberation struggle.
Thanks, Athol. How will we be judged in 20 years? Good one. Thank you very much. Prof Williams, huge thanks to you. You've given us a lot of your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. We appreciate that. Athol, all the very best to you. We wish you success and in what you hope to achieve, and certainly hope that your message has got through and has made an impact and a difference to somebody today. Thanks, everybody. We'll have a boring discussion on instruction notes next week. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Bye, everyone.
Come on. Thanks, Prof.
Bye.
Enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.